Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another album of the week. This is episode number 132, and today I am focusing on Forbidden World, the debut album from a Swedish thrash metal band Antichrist, which, boy, it has pretty much already reached its 10th anniversary, so 10 years for this album already, because of, I guess, depending on wherever information you're pretty much are looking at, whether it be on Discogs or Metal Archives, there's usually, I guess, difference of months. I mean, on Metal Archives, it states it was originally released on September 30th of 2011. But if you look on Discogs, I guess it was like, what, October 6th or so, I guess, that it was released. There might have been delay there. Either way, it's already reached the 10th anniversary, so 10 years for this classic debut album already. I'll get into at least my just my overall experience and just time that I've spent listening to this album over the years. But Antichrist, if you're not familiar with these guys, again, like I've stated, they are from Sweden, which is Vaxio Kronoberg. I guess it's the location. Yeah, in Sweden. They were, again, formed all the way back in 2005. And they had at least released their debut demo, at least in 2009. And from there on, they were just at least mostly releasing demos and whatnot until obviously securing a record deal with High Roller Records. And that pretty much led, at least from at least 2010 to at least 2011, basically recording the album Forbidden World. Then finally, at least on around September 30th, which was, I think, what was the day that it was slated to be released. But who knows, there might have been a delay for why at least Discogs at least says that it was released on October 6th. Either way, it gets released through High Roller Records on both formats, whether it be at vinyl, record, or CD. Cassette actually was, the first cassette was actually released all the way in 2013 through Home Taping Cruelties. And then eventually, I guess, a few years ago or so, it's been at least back in print on at least the vinyl record format through I Hate Records. Either way, High Roller was the first label, and that's where it pretty much leads into basically just me spending years listening to this album, because I didn't really get to hear this album, at least own it, until a year after it had been released. And like, was it around July at least of 2012. So just a year later is when I was just spending my time listening to this. And I think what really grabbed me was from all the samples that I had heard on like YouTube, because again, I was just so intrigued by the overall artwork and the name and the overall title. I mean, it is so, and of course this was during the days when I was really kind of, someone really getting into really checking out a lot of High Roller Records stuff. Because they had they were mostly known for a lot of reissues, but eventually they did sign a lot of legitimate new bands and did release a lot of that stuff, and actually became one of the biggest hotbeds for at least a lot of the more burgeoning newer thrash metal, and at times what is pretty much still tagged as the new wave or traditional heavy metal. Basically all the metal bands that wanted to kind of really sort of recapture a bit of that sort of 80s sound and whatnot, and Antichrist was one of those bands that was at least some of the forefront there in the early 2010s, basically, especially with this album right here. But when I first got this in the mail, and I just spent at least days or weeks, and then ended up months, so then turning into this years of just spending my time listening to this. And I've already hyped this album quite a bit anyways during a lot of it. Anytime whenever I was given a chance to throw this album in one of my, let's say, list videos and whatnot that I would do on here on YouTube, for at least whether the vinyl community or whatnot, all those contest stuff, if I was given a chance, I was going to throw this album in there. This is easily was one of my favorite albums, just favorite thrash metal albums that come up within the 2010s. This is technically Antichrist's style. They really do take a lot of their inspiration from a lot of the Teutonic bands, for example, like Creator Destruction and Necronomicon and Death Row and those kind of bands. But you definitely can hear the influence from maybe like Possessed and Exodus, and maybe again early Slayer, mostly Show No Mercy, and the Haunting the Chapel EP. I guess maybe here and there a little bit of Hell Awaits, but not so much. It's definitely the really first two releases being again the Show No Mercy album, and of course the Haunting the Chapel EP. Those were definitely the main inspirations for this for their musical style on this album. But you definitely get a lot of, again, like early Exodus, for example, again, like Bonded by Blood. But they do it in a way that is at least more sort of unique to their sound. At least that sounds very regional to them. That gives it a very foreign feel because of them being from Sweden. It does have that almost really dark, almost Swedish feel to it. But it's still, you can tell the American and German influences, and at times British. If you were to throw in like Onslaught, mostly for example, Power from Hell and The Force. Those two albums are definitely the ones that come to mind, but they do it in a way that just sounds different because the guitar tone on here, it's not completely overdriven where it's like completely distorted like a lot of you expect from, again, like the sort of classic thrash bands who really, who always turned up the gain on their amps, but here you can tell the gains on the amps for at least for Antichrist here are a little bit low, but they're still to where the volume is turned up to where it actually creates a little bit of distortion where it kind of gives it a bit of a raw feel, but it works to at least to their musical, it works to their advantage and it makes the songs work, and it still comes off raw and heavy and just overall noisy, but not completely noisy. There's still a lot of hooks and guitar melodies at times to them, especially within songs like, for example, like Torment in Hell, Victim of the Blade, Death Rays, and Terror Dimension or Sign of the Beast. You can kind of hear them in there, and that's definitely coming from their overall inspiration from like Possessed. But then you get a lot of the sort of almost at times Merciful Fate influences that's really definitely heard on songs like Necropolis and Minotaur, which are definitely the longer songs on the album. Necropolis is what, it clocks in at 8 minutes and 10 seconds. And it's just a slower track, but it's goddamn, there is such a cool fucking atmosphere. I love it. I love what they do with the song. It's, again, they really are able to really kind of, again, to just hone in on the riffs. Everything just sounds heavy. It's not trying to, again, because of the guitar tones and whatnot, and where they've got the knobs turned on the amps. It's not heavy for at least for your average modern metal listener, but to at least an old school metal listener, this is still heavy enough to where, again, they make it work. It just gives it just the overall raw vibe, and I just dig it. But I think a song like Necropolis is where they really bring in their sort of almost traditional heavy metal influences, definitely from bands like, for example, Merciful Fate, or at times maybe even Manila Road, I guess you could say, maybe that might fall into there too. And of course, maybe like Heavy Load or any of those kind of bands are bringing in influences on this song. But it's, I think, the crowning jewel of some of these more longer ones, at least the more traditional metal influenced tracks, has to be the instrumental Minotaur. This is was always my favorite song off of this one. You can hear the Merciful Fate influence on this track. It's almost like a Merciful Fate wanted to do an instrumental. It just comes off like that. You can at times even hear a little bit of the new wave of British heavy metal influence on this one too, but I really can hear a lot more of the Merciful Fate sort of influence on this song, and there's a lot of great tempo changes. It's actually a great instrumental. When it comes to instrumentals and thrash metal, when that combination, usually everyone thinks, like Orion at times from Metallica, but this is no Orion, which is thankfully, because I find Orion to be one of the most boring songs anyways that Metallica's ever written. I mean, I know a lot of people also will crap on at times a little bit. If you were to bring up anyone that might have any criticism Metallica's instrumental. Some people also slag on the Call of Cthulhu, but compared to Orion, I always kind of thought Call of Cthulhu was at least better, better constructed compared to Orion. But Minotaur is not that. This is definitely a very entertaining instrumental. Again, from the overall, the tempo changes to the riffs. My God, it's great. But there's just so many great stuff on here. Again, the vocals at times definitely come off almost that kind of almost pseudo extreme metal. Again, very much modern, but at the same time, it works through the songs. Again, it gives it that sort of almost raw feel to it, and I just love it. Everything about the sound I like. The production, the recording quality, it sounds raw. It gives it a very organic feel. It doesn't sound like there's a lot of trigger drums or anything like that. It doesn't sound digitally recorded. It sounds organic and authentic, like they might have recorded this on analog equipment. It's perfect. It fits the album, and it's great. This was easily one of my favorite albums of at least the 2010s, and it's just a great thrash metal album. There's just nothing bad about here. Again, it still is one of my favorite albums. After this, Antichrist did release a follow-up, and that wasn't until like 2017, so close to at least maybe 6 years later or 7 years later, basically 6 years actually, with Sinful Birth, which is a good album in its own right. That was great. I'm also failing to mention that in 2013 they did release a single full of 2 new songs, which is titled Burn Beyond Recognition, which is also great. But it definitely kind of gives you this sort of at least a hint on what direction they're going with Sinful Birth, which they were going way heavier at times, almost mixing a little bit of almost more pseudo death metal influences at times into it. But it is a good album. But to me, still, for the years I've spent listening to Forbidden World, there's definitely I wouldn't say nostalgia, because again, it's been 10 years. Using the term nostalgia for something you had heard 10 years ago, I think it is very much stretching it, because if it at least had been something you heard 20 years or 30 years ago, yeah, that is definitely where I think the term nostalgia works, but Forbidden World was only 10 years ago. But I just spent years listening to it, and it was fucking great. But Sinful Birth was, I think, a fine album, but Forbidden World is my favorite. So, it is great. Either way, that's pretty much where I'm at right now. It's a fantastic album. That's all I gotta say. If you're not familiar with Forbidden World, I recommend checking the album out. It is great. But if you have at least heard this album, again, if you have any sort of negative or at least positive comments, you can leave them in the comment section below. So with that, I hope all of you enjoyed. This is Swedish Thrash saying I'm out. And I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.